Hello, my name is Jada Simone, and on today's video, I'll be sharing some tips of how I've learned to avoid food waste. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever get to the point where we can completely avoid food waste, but we can make steps in the right direction to get as close to preventing food waste as possible. I do want to define what food waste is. Food waste is edible, safe to eat food discarded at the retail or consumer level, such as in households, restaurants, or stores. It results from improper storage, overproduction, or aesthetic standards, contributing to significant economic losses, environmental damage, and greenhouse gas emissions. Roughly 1/3 of all food produced is never eaten. So the Jada definition of all of that, speaking from even my personal experiences, when food goes to waste, whether that's due to improper storage on my end, even not reading the directions of how I was supposed to properly store it, which we're going to talk more about in this video, overbuying things that end up going to waste because on the meal planning level, I wasn't as intentional of how I was going to use the produce or whatever it was I was buying. The first tip that I want to share when it comes to preventing food waste is to shop with intention and not impulse. One thing that I've noticed is that when I slow down in the meal planning phase and I actually take time to plan what I'm going to eat, I often prevent food waste that way because I'm not shopping sporadically when I get to the grocery store or just picking up items that I would eat, but I have no plan on how they'll get used, and then they end up going to waste in the fridge. Versus when I take that time out and I'm more intentional about what I'm getting from the grocery store and how I plan to use it. The second tip that I want to share is to store produce in a way that extends its shelf life. Proper storage directly impacts how long your food will last. For example, I've noticed that when I buy spinach and I leave it in the plastic bags that they come in, they typically would spoil much easier. So what I started doing was removing the spinach from the plastic bags and layering the spinach in a container with paper towels. This has helped prevent so much food waste, and the trick is that the paper towels absorb the moisture. I also want to figure out a way to not use so many paper towels when it comes to preventing food waste, just because I want to be mindful of that, and I do recognize that's something that I want to work on. If you have any tips about that, please feel free to drop any tips in the comments and share with us, because this is a community and we share over here. And this isn't limited to spinach. This can also be for cucumbers. I've noticed when I wrap cucumber with paper towel and I put it in a sandwich bag, that paper towel absorbing that moisture helps that cucumber last a lot longer. My third tip is to be mindful of what foods you store next to each other. This is something that I had to learn the hard way. I would notice certain produce would go bad easily or start to brown much faster when they were next to other produce. For example, I learned that onions and potatoes aren't supposed to go next to each other because onions make potatoes spoil quicker. My next tip when it comes to avoiding food waste is to make sure your food is visible and accessible in your fridge. A lot of times when I did run into food waste, it was simply because I didn't see that I had those items in the fridge. So when we're intentional about how we store the items so that we can see them, we'll likely avoid food waste much better. And what I mean by this is to arrange your fridge in a way that makes sense for you. If you know, for example, that you bought a cucumber, and a cucumber is typically something that you would not remember is in your fridge, I would recommend putting your cucumber somewhere you can see it. For example, not storing it under items that you probably wouldn't forget about and putting it at the very top. Like putting the cucumber on top of the carrots, because carrots typically last much longer than a cucumber would in the fridge. And you would likely be okay about forgetting the carrots versus forgetting the cucumber, which would go bad much quicker. And another thing that has helped me to avoid food waste is to store my food in clear containers. When we store food in containers that are dark, that have solid colored tops, it's not as easy to see what's in there. And that's how we would typically forget that there's food in the fridge that we could eat, but we just didn't see it, and that can lead to food waste. The next tip that I want to share that I'm still learning myself for sure is to follow proper storage instructions. You will not believe how many items you have that you may be storing incorrectly, and it might actually be leading to those items spoiling much quicker than they actually should. For example, I bought some peanut butter from Walmart and I opened it. It had been in the pantry for weeks, honestly months. And I just so happened to turn it around and read that after you open the peanut butter, you're actually supposed to store it upside down in the refrigerator. Now, to some people, it's like, oh, what's the big deal? But I actually did notice a difference in the consistency when it was stored in the pantry versus when it was stored in the fridge. When it was in the pantry, it was much more runnier, and you could tell even the heat of this season was affecting its quality. But once I put it in the fridge, it was much more easier to even get it out of the container versus it drooping everywhere when I had it in the pantry. So it's something as small as reading those instructions and following the instructions on the packaging that will help you so much. Another example is when I bought coconut aminos from Whole Foods. Again, stored it in the pantry, didn't think anything of it. And I turn it around and it says store in the refrigerator after opening. And I was like, wow, this entire time I had been storing coconut aminos in the pantry. Now, every branding's instructions might be different, but now I'm going to be turning around every package of everything that I buy to see, am I actually storing this properly, or is there a better way to do so? I often also see this when it comes to things like food broths. Typically, after you open food broth, you're actually supposed to store the rest in the fridge and finish it within 7 days, because after that 7 days, it typically says that it'll spoil or go bad. A lot of people don't know this, and this is something that I didn't know until I started to turn around the package and look at the instructions. And that's only if you store it properly in the fridge. I can only imagine how quick it'll spoil if you put it back in the pantry or leave it out when it's open. The next tip that I want to share when it comes to avoiding food waste is to use your freezer as a tool and not a last resort. I've recently been using my freezer to store my Tastic bread from Aldi. And when I tell you, first of all, this bread is really, really good. I like that it's firm. I like that it has all the nutritional benefits, of course. But this bread, I've noticed, is a quality bread that you can store in the freezer. I know that some people are hesitant to store food like bread in the freezer because of how textures can change when you defrost them. But I've noticed and I've tested to see if there's a difference between when I put it in the freezer versus when I don't put it in the freezer. And believe it or not, the texture typically stays almost the same. I do want to share this tip specifically on bread sparingly because it really does depend on the quality and texture of your bread. I know sometimes people complain about how white breads or other breads may go soggy quicker because they don't have that firmness versus a bread like a protein bread or a whole grain bread that's very firm. So I just wanted to give that side note. Freezing my bread has been a game changer. It has avoided bread going to waste, and it's something that I can easily get out the freezer, plop in the oven, make my breakfast, and it's been a really great addition to avoiding food waste. And this, of course, isn't limited to freezing bread. I've also frozen spinach that I've made and didn't use all of. I've even frozen aloe vera. So there's so many different ways we can use our freezer as a tool. It's important that we remember that so we're not so quick to throw something out without even assessing, could I freeze this? Is it to the point where I couldn't use it in the future? We want to do our quality checks, use our senses, our nose, our eyes, and be realistic, because unfortunately and realistically, everything cannot be saved. Every food item cannot be spared. Some things just gotta go in the trash, but we can do our best to prevent food waste when we can. My last and final tip when it comes to avoiding food waste is that we should share before we throw away. Before you throw away those red onions that you overbought or that oatmeal that you no longer want, but its expiration date hasn't passed, Ask a friend if they want it. Ask a neighbor if they want it. Ask a family member if they want it. I truly believe that if we just phone a friend or phone someone in our community, we can avoid food waste so much more. And I look forward to even implementing this more in my own life and not just letting things past its expiration dates before I think to give it away. And this isn't limited to family and friends. This also can include your local food pantry, community centers, and your church. So don't overlook how you can share items that may be in your pantry that you no longer want and that could really go to someone who's in need of food. I hope today's video was insightful and is something that will help you avoid food waste in the future. Be sure to comment down below which food waste tips you'll be using in the future and even other food waste tips that you may have that I didn't cover in this video. If you're interested in seeing more content surrounding nutrition, cooking, and health and wellness rooted in biblical truth, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I would love to have you a part of this community. That's all for today. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your week, weekend, or day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!